Hands crime scene. Stand up, now.
Officer, I'm sitting in a public park. That's not a crime.
You're refusing a lawful order. Last warning.
You don't have reasonable suspicion. This is unlawful.
Turn around. You're going in cuffs.
Then you're about...
The body camera footage captured the exact moment Officer Kyle Braden's career effectively ended, though he wouldn't realize it for another 20 minutes. The timestamp read 10:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. And Marcus Thorne, the man Braden was approaching with his hand resting ominously on his duty belt, was doing the most dangerous thing a black man could do in the manicured suburb of Oak Creek. He was sitting on a park bench feeding pigeons. Marcus Thorne didn't look like a threat. At 62 years old, he wore pressed khaki trousers, a navy blue windbreaker, and a flat cap that sat neatly on his graying head. He had the posture of a man who had spent a lifetime standing at attention, a spine stiffened by decades of discipline. He was tossing crumbled pieces of whole wheat bread to a gathering of gray and white birds, his movements slow and deliberate. He wasn't looking around nervously. He wasn't casing the expensive colonial-style homes that lined the perimeter of the park. He was simply existing. But to Officer Kyle Braden, a 27-year-old patrolman with 3 years on the force and a chip on his shoulder the size of the precinct, Thorne was a subject. Braden had received a call from a resident, a vague, nervous report about a man who didn't look like he belonged, lingering near the playground. Most experienced officers would have done a drive-by, seen an elderly man feeding birds, and cleared the call. But Braden was hungry for action. He had transferred from a busier district where adrenaline was cheap, and the quiet streets of Oak Creek bored him. He parked his cruiser aggressively, 2 wheels hopping the curb, ensuring his presence was felt. Before we get into the details of this infuriating encounter, I need you to do something for me. If you believe that experience and dignity should command respect, not suspicion, go ahead and hit that like button right now. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? This story is going to make your blood boil, but you need to see how it ends. Marcus heard the crunch of boots on gravel behind him. He didn't flinch. He didn't turn around immediately. He had spent 35 years in law enforcement, rising from a beat cop in the toughest wards of Chicago to the chief of police for the third largest department in the country. He knew the sound of an approaching officer. He knew the cadence of the walk, the heavy rhythmic thud of tactical boots, the slight jingle of the handcuff keys against the baton. He knew exactly who was behind him before a word was spoken. "Hey, partner, let me see your hands." Braden's voice cut through the morning calm. It wasn't a request. It was a command laden with the unearned authority of a man who thought the badge made him a king. Marcus paused. He slowly brushed the breadcrumbs from his hands, keeping them perfectly visible, and turned his head. He looked at the young officer over the rim of his wire-frame glasses. He saw the stance, bladed at a 45-degree angle, hand hovering near the holstered Glock chest puffed out. It was a stance of escalation, not inquiry. "Good morning, officer," Marcus said, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that commanded courtrooms and precinct roll calls for decades. "Is there a problem?" "I said, let me see your hands. Keep them where I can see them." Braden snapped, stepping closer, invading Marcus's personal space. "We've got reports of suspicious activity in the area. I need you to stand up and step away from the bench." Marcus didn't move. He remained seated, his hands resting calmly on his knees. He analyzed the situation instantly. No reasonable suspicion, no articulable crime. Just a fishing expedition based on a bias-filled phone call. "Officer," Marcus said, his tone shifting from polite to professional, "I am sitting in a public park. The park is open. I am feeding birds. Unless you can articulate a specific crime I am suspected of committing, I am under no obligation to stand up or step away from this bench." Braden blinked. He wasn't used to this. In his experience, people either scrambled to comply or they ran. They didn't use words like articulate. They didn't look him in the eye with bored indifference. I'm conducting an investigation, Braden said, his voice rising, and you're interfering with it. Now stand up or I'm going to make you stand up. The air in the park seemed to grow heavy, the silence between the two men amplifying the chirping of the birds that had scattered at Braden's approach. Marcus Thorne looked at the young officer and saw a younger version of mistakes he had corrected 1,000 times in his career. He saw fear masked as aggression. He saw a lack of training. He saw a lawsuit waiting to happen. "Officer," Marcus said, keeping his voice level and devoid of emotion, "you are attempting to convert a consensual encounter into a detention. For that, you need reasonable suspicion that criminal activity is afoot. Terry v. Ohio. You have a report of a man in a park. I am a man in a park. That is not a crime. It is not even a misdemeanor. It is a Tuesday morning." Braden's face flushed a deep crimson. The mention of case law seemed to insult him. He stepped around the bench, positioning himself directly in front of Marcus, blocking the sun. "I don't need a law lecture from a vagrant." Braden spat his hand, now gripping the top of his baton holster. "I need your ID, now. Provide identification or you're going to jail for failure to identify." "Virginia is not a stop-and-identify state unless I am being lawfully detained for a crime," Marcus replied, not missing a beat. He knew the statutes of this state as well as he knew his own children's birthdays. He had consulted on the reform committee that updated them 5 years ago. "I am not refusing to identify myself because I have something to hide. I am refusing because you have not established the legal threshold to demand it. What is the crime, officer? Be specific." "Loitering." Braden grasped at straws. "Trespassing. We've had break-ins in this neighborhood. Loitering requires intent to commit a crime or obstruction of public passage. I am sitting on a bench," Marcus noted dryly. "And you cannot trespass in a public park during operating hours. As for break-ins, generalized criminal activity in an area does not constitute reasonable suspicion for a specific individual. Brown versus Texas, you are striking out son." The word son was the spark that lit the fuse. Braden's ego, fragile and bruised by this older black man's calm superiority, snapped. He keyed his radio, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "Dispatch, send me a second unit. I've got a non-compliant subject at Oak Creek Park. Male, black, 60s. He's becoming belligerent and refusing lawful commands." Marcus shook his head slightly, a gesture of profound disappointment. "I haven't raised my voice. I haven't moved. I haven't threatened you. Asserting my Fourth Amendment rights is not belligerence. It is citizenship." "Last chance," Braden said, stepping back and unclipping his handcuffs from his belt. The metal rattled ominously. "ID, now." "I am under no legal obligation to assist you in violating my civil rights," Marcus said. He didn't reach for his pocket. He didn't reach for his wallet. He knew that any sudden movement now with an officer this agitated could result in a shooting. He kept his hands open, palms up on his knees. "I suggest you call your supervisor before you do something that will cost you your pension." Braden laughed, a short, nervous bark of a sound. "My supervisor isn't going to help you, pal. You're going for a ride." A woman walking her golden retriever about 30 feet away had stopped. She pulled out her phone. Marcus noticed her. He gave her a subtle nod. "Film this," the nod said. "We are going to need it." "Stand up," Braden shouted, losing all pretense of professional control. "Turn around." "I am remaining seated," Marcus said softly. "I am not resisting, but I am not consenting." Braden didn't wait. He lunged forward, grabbing Marcus by the left arm and yanking him upward with unnecessary force. Marcus, despite his age, was solid. He rose with the pull, not fighting it but not helping it either. He allowed his body to go limp, a passive resistance technique that forced Braden to support his weight. The physical contact changed everything. Legally, the line had been crossed from a verbal dispute to an assault under the color of authority. Braden spun Marcus around, shoving him toward the back of the bench. The older man's knees hit the wood hard, but he didn't cry out. He didn't grunt. He merely adjusted his footing to maintain his balance, ensuring he wouldn't fall and give the officer an excuse to claim he was fighting back. "Stop resisting," Braden yelled for the benefit of the recording witness and the body camera microphone, a tactic as old as policing itself. "I am not resisting," Marcus stated clearly, speaking toward the officer's chest-mounted camera. "I am complying with your physical force under duress. I am stating for the record that this is an unlawful arrest lacking probable cause." Braden jammed Marcus's left arm behind his back, twisting the wrist at a painful angle. He reached for the right arm. "You're under arrest for obstruction of justice and disorderly conduct." "There is nothing disorderly about sitting on a bench," Marcus said, his face pressed uncomfortably close to the rough bark of an oak tree near the bench. "And verbal disagreement with a police officer is not obstruction. City of Houston versus Hill. You are piling mistakes on top of mistakes." "Shut up." Braden cranked the handcuffs down. Click, click. The steel bit into Marcus's wrists. They were tight, too tight. Braden didn't check for spacing. He didn't double lock them to prevent tightening. He just squeezed them shut in a fit of adrenaline. By now, 2 other people had stopped. The woman with the dog was narrating into her phone. "He was just feeding the birds," she was saying, her voice trembling with indignation. "The officer just came up and grabbed him." Braden spun Marcus around to face him. The young officer was breathing hard, sweating slightly despite the cool breeze. Marcus was perfectly composed, though his shoulder ached from the manipulation. He looked at Braden with a gaze that was terrifyingly empty of fear. It was the look of a man who was already writing the after-action report in his head. "You have the right to remain silent," Braden began reciting the Miranda warning with rapid, aggressive staccato. "I know my rights," Marcus interrupted calmly. "Better than you do, and I am exercising them. But before you put me in that car, officer, I am going to give you one piece of advice, a professional courtesy." "I don't want to hear it." Braden shoved Marcus forward toward the patrol car, his hand heavy on the back of Marcus's neck. "You need to hear it," Marcus said, stumbling slightly but regaining his footing. "You are about to conduct a search incident to arrest. You are going to look for my identification. When you reach into my back right pocket, I want you to look very carefully at what you find. And I want you to think about the mortgage on your house, because you are about to lose it." Braden scoffed. "Is that a threat? Are you threatening an officer?" "It's not a threat," Marcus said as they reached the rear door of the cruiser. "It's a forecast." Braden opened the back door. The interior was a cage of hard plastic and metal mesh. "Get in." "I cannot get in until you search me," Marcus reminded him. "Procedure, officer. If you put me in there with a weapon, you're liable. Do your job." Braden paused. He had been so angry he had almost skipped the pat-down. He cursed under his breath and spun Marcus around again. He patted down the waist, the legs, the pockets. He felt the square shape of the wallet in the back right pocket. "Let's see who you really are," Braden sneered. He pulled the leather wallet out. It was high-quality distressed leather, molded to the shape of its contents. Braden flipped it open. He expected a driver's license, maybe a suspended one, maybe an out-of-state ID. What he saw made the world stop spinning. Pinned to the leather flap of the wallet was a gold shield. It wasn't a replica. It wasn't a family member of courtesy badge. It was a heavy, solid gold shield with blue enamel inlay. The eagle on top was spread-winged and proud. The lettering was engraved deep into the metal, worn smooth by years of rubbing against a pocket. Chief of Police Reti, City of Chicago, Marcus A. Thorne. Below the badge was a laminated ID card. It showed a photo of Marcus slightly younger wearing a uniform with 4 stars on the collar. The text confirmed his rank and his retirement date, which was only 2 years prior. It also listed his status as a sworn peace officer with nationwide carry privileges under LEOSA. Officer Braden stared at the badge. His brain tried to reject what his eyes were seeing. He looked from the gold shield to the man in handcuffs, then back to the shield. The silence that followed was deafening. The birds had returned to the breadcrumbs on the ground, cooing softly, oblivious to the catastrophe unfolding on the sidewalk. Braden's stomach dropped. It felt as if he were on an elevator that had suddenly snapped its cable. He had just arrested a chief of police, not just a sergeant or a lieutenant, but a chief. A man who sat at the top of the food chain. A man who ate breakfast with mayors and played golf with senators. "You." Braden's voice cracked. He cleared his throat. "You're a cop." "No." Marcus said, his back still turned to the officer. "I was a cop. For 35 years. I was the man who signed the paychecks for 3,000 officers. I was the man who fired officers for exactly what you are doing right now." Braden's hands were shaking. He could feel the sweat turning cold on his forehead. He looked around. The woman with the phone was still recording. A second car was pulling up his backup. He was trapped. If he let Marcus go now, he admitted he was wrong. He admitted the arrest was bad. He would look incompetent in front of the civilians and his fellow officers. But if he continued... Ego is a dangerous drug. Instead of apologizing, instead of unlocking the cuffs and begging for mercy, Braden's defense mechanism kicked in. He convinced himself that the badge might be fake, or that being a retired chief didn't give Marcus the right to be disrespectful. "This doesn't mean anything," Braden said, though his voice lacked the conviction it held moments ago. He shoved the wallet into his own pocket. "You still refused a lawful order. You still obstructed my investigation. Being a retired chief doesn't put you above the law. And being a rookie doesn't put you above the Constitution," Marcus countered. "You have a choice right now, son. You can unclick these cuffs and we can have a very serious conversation with your sergeant right here. Or you can put me in that car and I will own your department by Christmas." The backup officer, a burly man named Officer Miller, walked up. "What's the situation, Kyle?" Miller asked, looking at the well-dressed elderly man in handcuffs. Braden panic-whispered, leaning in close to Miller. "He refused ID. Belligerent. I've got him for obstruction." Miller looked at Marcus. He saw the clothes. He saw the demeanor. He looked at Braden. "He looks pretty calm to me, Kyle. You sure about this?" "He's going in," Braden said too loud, trying to regain control. "Get in the car." Marcus looked at Officer Miller. "Officer, I advise you to check his Bodycam footage before you write your supplemental report. Do not adopt his liability." Miller's eyes widened slightly. That was cop talk. High-level cop talk. Braden shoved Marcus's head down and guided him into the back seat. He slammed the door. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Marcus sat in the back, adjusting his shoulders against the hard plastic seat. He closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself. He wasn't angry anymore. He was past anger. He was in work mode. He began memorizing the timestamps. 10:14. Contact. 10:18. Arrest. 10:22. Placement in vehicle. Braden got into the front seat. He didn't look back at the prisoner partition. He started the engine. His hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. He knew deep down he had just made a fatal error. But he drove on, heading toward the precinct, driving the final nails into his own professional coffin. The drive to the precinct usually took 12 minutes. Braden did it in 9. The silence in the patrol car was suffocating. It smelled of stale coffee and the industrial disinfectant used to wipe down the back seat after the previous night's drunks. Marcus sat perfectly upright despite the handcuffs digging into his lumbar spine. He watched the back of Braden's head. He saw the officer checking the rearview mirror every 10 seconds, his eyes darting nervously. Marcus didn't say a word. He knew the power of silence. In an interrogation, silence terrified the guilty. And right now, Braden was guilty. Every minute of silence allowed Braden's imagination to run wild, constructing the nightmare scenarios that were about to befall him. When the cruiser rolled into the sally port of the 4th Precinct, the heavy steel doors clanged shut behind them, sealing the vehicle in the concrete bay. Braden killed the engine. He took a deep breath, trying to compose himself. He had to sell this. He had to make the booking sergeant believe that this 62-year-old retiree was a menace to society. Braden opened the back door and hauled Marcus out. "Let's go." "Processing." They walked through the secure hallway into the booking area. It was a bustling room filled with the chaotic energy of police work phones ringing radios, squawking prisoners, shouting from holding cells. Behind the high desk sat Sergeant Kowalski. Kowalski was a dinosaur, a 30-year veteran with a mustache that looked like a push broom and eyes that had seen everything under the sun. Kowalski looked up from his paperwork as Braden led Marcus to the bench. He took in the scene in a single glance. He saw the young, flushed rookie. He saw the dignified black man in expensive khakis and a windbreaker. He saw the handcuffs. And most importantly, he saw the look on Marcus's face. It wasn't the look of a criminal. It was the look of a commander inspecting the troops. "What do we have here, Braden?" Kowalski asked, his voice gravelly and skeptical. "Obstruction failure to identify disorderly conduct." Braden rattled off, placing Marcus's personal effects on the counter. Keys, a handkerchief, and the wallet. Kowalski reached for the wallet. "Failure to ID in the park." "Yes, Sarge. Suspicious person call." He refused to cooperate. Kowalski opened the wallet to log the ID. He stopped, his eyes fixed on the gold badge pinned inside. He went still. The room seemed to quiet down around him. Other officers nearby, sensing the shift in the sergeant's demeanor, stopped their conversations. Kowalski looked up slowly. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the badge again. Then he looked at Braden with an expression of pure disbelief mixed with pity. "Braden," Kowalski said, his voice dangerously low, "did you look inside this wallet?" "Yes, Sarge. I saw it." "You saw it," Kowalski repeated. "You saw that this man is a retired chief of police for the city of Chicago, and you brought him into my booking room in handcuffs for feeding birds." The room went dead silent. Every head turned. A detective who was drinking coffee by the file cabinets choked on his drink. "He refused a lawful order," Braden insisted, his voice cracking. "He was non-compliant." Marcus spoke for the first time since entering the building. "Sergeant," he said, his voice calm and authoritative, "I would like to request that the watch commander be notified immediately. I would also like to request that my handcuffs be removed, as I am not a flight risk and I am currently losing circulation in my thumbs." Kowalski didn't hesitate. "Braden, get those cuffs off him, now." "But Sarge, he's under arrest." "I said get them off," Kowalski roared, standing up. "And someone get Captain Reynolds down here, now." Captain Reynolds was a man who hated surprises. He was 55, balding, and counting down the days to his own retirement. When the desk sergeant called him saying, "Cap, you need to come downstairs. Braden just arrested a ghost," Reynolds knew his day was ruined. He walked into the booking area just as Braden was reluctantly unclicking the handcuffs from Marcus's wrists. Marcus rubbed his wrists, grimacing slightly at the red indentations left by the steel. He adjusted his jacket, straightened his cap, and turned to face the captain. Reynolds stopped in his tracks. He recognized the face immediately. 2 years ago, at the National Law Enforcement Leadership Conference in D.C., Marcus Thorne had been the keynote speaker. Reynolds had sat in the third row taking notes on community policing strategies. "Chief Thorne," Reynolds asked, his voice sounding small in the large room. "Captain." Marcus nodded politely. "I believe it's Captain Reynolds, correct? We met in D.C. Reynolds went pale. He looked at Braden, who was standing there looking like a child who had just broken a priceless vase. Then he looked back at Marcus. Chief, I am incredibly sorry. I don't know what happened here, but I can tell you what happened, Marcus said. Your officer detained me without reasonable suspicion. He escalated a consensual encounter into a seizure. He used excessive force on a compliant subject. He arrested me for asserting my Fourth Amendment rights, and he ignored my advice to seek a supervisor before confirming the arrest. Reynolds closed his eyes for a second, rubbing his temples. Braden, my office, now. Sir, I followed protocol. Braden tried to argue. Get in my office. Reynolds screamed, the veins in his neck bulging. Braden flinched and scurried away toward the elevators. Reynolds turned back to Marcus. Chief, please, come with me. Let's get you some water. We can resolve this. We can unarrest you right now. No charges filed. I'll drive you back to your car personally. Marcus stood his ground. He didn't move toward the friendly offer. Captain, I appreciate the courtesy, but we are past the point of a ride home. I was booked. My name is in your system. I was handcuffed in front of my neighbors. We'll scrub the record, Reynolds promised. It'll be like it never happened. No, Marcus said firmly. It happened, and I want the record to reflect that it happened. I want the body camera footage preserved. I want the dispatch logs preserved. I want the dash cam footage from the transport vehicle. I am formally notifying you of my intent to file a civil rights lawsuit against this department and Officer Braden individually. Reynolds sighed, his shoulders slumping. He knew there was no talking him out of it. Marcus Thorne wasn't looking for a favor. He was looking for accountability. Chief, don't do this. Braden is an idiot, but the department hired him, Marcus said. The department trained him, and the department allowed him to patrol my neighborhood thinking that a black man on a bench is a criminal. This isn't about me, Captain. If he did this to me, a man who knows the law and has the resources to fight back, imagine what he's been doing to the kids in this city who don't have a voice. I'm not doing this for me, I'm doing it for them. Marcus reached for his wallet on the counter. Am I free to go, or am I being held? You're free to go, sir, Reynolds whispered. Good, I'll be in touch. Marcus turned and walked out of the station. He didn't look back. He walked out the front doors, hailed a taxi, and went home to prepare for war. The lawsuit hit the city attorney's desk on a Friday morning, 3 days later. It was a masterpiece of legal drafting, 25 pages alleging violations of the 4th and 14th Amendments, false imprisonment, battery, and emotional distress. It demanded a jury trial and stripped Braden of his qualified immunity defense by citing clearly established case law that every rookie should know. But the real explosion happened when the footage leaked. Marcus hadn't leaked it. The department hadn't released it. It came from the woman with the golden retriever. She had posted her cell phone video to a neighborhood watch group, and from there it went viral. The headline wrote itself, "Retired Police Chief Arrested for Feeding Birds." The video was damning. It showed a calm, elderly man sitting on a bench. It showed a young, aggressive officer escalating the situation out of nowhere. It showed the violent yanking of the arm. It showed the handcuffs. The comments section was a firestorm. He treated a chief like a criminal. If they do this to a chief, what chance do I have? Fire him immediately. The media camped out on Marcus's lawn. He gave one press conference standing on his porch in a suit and tie. He didn't yell. He didn't call for violence. He spoke with the measured cadence of a statesman. I spent 35 years wearing a badge, Marcus told the cameras. I believe in law enforcement. I believe in the nobility of the profession. But the badge is a shield to protect the community, not a sword to attack it. Officer Braden saw my skin color and assumed criminality. He ignored the law to satisfy his ego. And that is a culture we cannot tolerate. The internal affairs investigation was swift and brutal. With the spotlight of the national media on them, the department couldn't sweep anything under the rug. They pulled Braden's file. They found a pattern. Over his 3 years, Braden had a disproportionately high rate of stop and identify arrests. He had 6 complaints for rudeness and excessive force, all from minority residents. Every single one had been dismissed as unfounded by his previous supervisors, but they couldn't dismiss Marcus Thorne. Investigators interviewed Braden. He tried to stick to his story that he felt threatened. But when they played the video frame by frame, asking him to point out the threat, he couldn't do it. He sat in silence, watching himself destroy his own life. The city manager called an emergency meeting. "Settle it," he told the city attorney. "I don't care what it costs. Just make it go away before we end up on CNN every night for the next month." But Marcus wasn't interested in a quick settlement. He wanted reforms. He demanded that the department implement mandatory de-escalation training. He demanded a review of all obstruction arrests made in the last 5 years. He demanded that the stop and identify policy be rewritten to explicitly match the constitutional standard. And he demanded Braden's badge. 6 weeks after the incident, Officer Kyle Braden was terminated for cause. The official reasoning cited conduct unbecoming, violation of civil rights, and incompetence. The police union, usually fierce in defending their own, quietly stepped aside. The video was indefensible. Braden was toxic. He cleared out his locker at midnight, avoiding the gaze of his fellow officers. The settlement was finalized a month later. The city paid Marcus Thorne $450,000. It was a significant sum, but for Marcus, it was never about the money. On the day the check cleared, Marcus walked into the office of the local public defender. He placed the check on the desk. "I want to start a legal defense fund," he told the stunned attorney, "for people who get stopped for loitering and can't afford a lawyer. I want to make sure the next kid who meets an Officer Braden has a fighting chance." The department underwent a massive overhaul. Captain Reynolds took early retirement. The training academy curriculum was rewritten with Marcus Thorne's arrest video used as a case study in what not to do. 6 months later, the park in Oak Creek was quiet again. The leaves had turned from green to gold and red. The morning air was crisp. Marcus Thorne sat on the same bench. He wore a thick wool coat and a scarf. A bag of bird seed sat open next to him. He reached in, grabbed a handful, and scattered it on the ground. The pigeons descended in a flurry of gray wings. He watched them eat. He thought about the letters he had received, hundreds of them. Some from other retired officers thanking him for upholding the standard. Some from young black men thanking him for standing up. He thought about Braden. He heard the young man had moved back to Ohio working construction. He hoped the boy had learned something. He hoped the system had learned something. But Marcus was a realist. He knew that for every Braden they caught, there were 10 more out there protected by silence and shadows. He wasn't angry anymore, but he wasn't complacent either. He realized that his retirement hadn't been an end to his service. It was just a change of venue. He was still protecting and serving just from the other side of the badge. A patrol car rolled slowly down the street adjacent to the park. It was a new recruit behind the wheel. The car slowed as it passed the bench. The officer looked at Marcus. Marcus stopped feeding the birds. He looked back, his eyes steady, his chin high. The young officer nodded respectfully and drove on. Marcus watched the car disappear around the corner. He took a deep breath of the cold air through the last of the seeds to the birds and smiled. It was a small victory. But in a war that had lasted centuries, small victories were the only kind that mattered. There's a quiet power in knowing who you are, a strength that doesn't need to shout to be heard. Marcus Thorne didn't just win a lawsuit. He reminded us that dignity is a right, not a privilege granted by a badge. His story is a stark reminder that authority without accountability is just tyranny dressed in a uniform. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? If a retired police chief can be handcuffed for feeding birds, what protects the rest of us? Is it the law, or is it just luck? I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to stand your ground against someone abusing their power? How did you handle it? Drop your story in the comments below. I read every single one, And if you believe in holding the line for justice, please like this video and subscribe. We have more stories to tell, and we can't do it without you. Stay safe, stay informed, and always know your rights.